Masechet Ketubot Daf Yod Aleph. We begin the Mishnah on top. Hagiyoret v'hashibuya v'hashifcha sheniftu v'shenitgayiru v'shenishtachereru pechutot mibenot shalosh shanim v'yom echad ketubatan matayim v'yesh lahem ta'anat betulim. We have three categories of women where if they are all suspected of having bi'ah before they are married. Number one is giyoret, someone who's a convert. So when she was not Jewish, they don't have the same laws and same morality, and so we suspect that she is not a Betulah because once upon a time she wasn't Jewish. So and then shivuya, someone who's taken a Jewish woman who was taken in captivity. Often the captors will violate the woman that they take. So we assume that also she is no longer a Betulah. It's against her will, but still she's not a Betulah. Shifcha means a Shifcha Kanaanit. So she wasn't Jewish, she became a Shifcha. As a Shifcha, they also don't live up to the standards of law and morals, even though she becomes freed, and when she becomes freed, she's fully Jewish. So that's all these three. Now, if you notice, the nouns are not in the same order as the verbs. The first two are switched. It says shenifdu, that applies to the second one, shivuya. Shinitgayiru applies to the first, hagiyoret. So that's curious why it's switched. The Ritva says, it mentions Giyoret first because that's the highest level. She came and decided she's going to convert and come to Judaism, so she's mentioned first because she gets the most honor. But when it comes to the actions, to free a captive, that's the greatest mitzvah for us to do, more than to convert someone. So it goes in order of importance of the person or importance of the action. Anyway, the point is that all these three people, we're going to see later on that if they were more than 3 years old when they converted or when they were captured, then we have to assume that they are be'ulah, not betulah anymore. But if this happens before they are 3 years old in one day, then even if there was some act when they were that young, we assume that will not affect them. It's not considered a sexual act. Their betulim will grow back, and therefore, it doesn't matter. And so they still get 200 like any Betulah. And also, the groom, if he doesn't find that there is blood, he can come and claim, hey, she's not a Betulah, I want my money back. And we don't tell him, well, hey, you knew she was a convert, so you knew that there was a possibility. No, since it was before 3, she is the same as someone who is a Betulah. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Gemara. Amar Rav Huna, ger katan matbilin oto al da'at bet din. Rav Huna says a halacha. In general, we're going to ask a question about him from our Mishnah. That's why it's related. He says that a child who converts, we can convert him even though he's a child. And in order to convert, you have to agree to it. You can't be converted against your will. And generally, a minor cannot agree to something. Nevertheless, the bet din can authorize it. They will oversee. They can be the legal guardians. We're going to see in a minute, this is talking about a case where the father doesn't. There's two options. Either a father, they're all converting, the father is converting the children. In this case, the Gemara is going to conclude that there's no father around, so the bet din is converting this child. That's a valid conversion. That's what Rav Huna says. Now, my kamash malan, we ask Rav Huna, isn't this obvious? It's meritorious to be Jewish, and there's a general law that you can do merit for someone even if they're not there. Tanena, we know it from a baraita. It's actually a Mishnah. We can do something good for a person without their consent. Like if there's I find something in the street and I say, oh, that person would like this, I can pick it up on their behalf and they fully own it. If it's a good deal, a good stock to buy, and I know this person would benefit from it, I can buy it without his knowledge and it's a valid acquisition. But you cannot make someone liable without their agreement. And so therefore, since being Jewish is a meritorious thing, you don't need their permission. And that's why, obviously, a child can be converted. The bet din can convert them even without their agreement. Even if it doesn't really matter if the child agrees or not, because his agreement isn't worth, it doesn't matter. Okay, so isn't this obvious? We already know it from a basic principle. Why, Rav Huna, why do you have to tell us that? Because I would have thought that actually a non-Jew may be happy being hefker, doing whatever he wants, having the freedom to not be under the burden of all the laws, and he can act as he will. After all, we do know that's true for an eved, a slave. Is it proper, a eved Kanaani? Can we free the eved Kanaani without his knowledge? You might think, oh, of course, everybody would rather be free than a slave. On the other hand, by becoming free, he becomes Jewish and therefore bound by all the laws. As an Eved, he is not bound by any of these laws. He can act any way he wants. And so, actually, if you ask some Avadim, they would say, no, I'd rather not have the rules. I'm more free as a slave. So therefore, it's not necessarily true that making someone Jewish is a merit for them, that they would for sure agree. That's what we would have thought. Kamash Malan, that's why Rav Huna says, gadol, isur, aval katan zechutu law. That law that a goy would prefer to remain not Jewish and not be under the law, that's only if he's an adult and he already tasted the taste of prohibition. So he already tasted what a cheeseburger is like. He's already been around, and he says, I like this life. Now, now I don't want to bound myself. But if it's a child, and the child did not yet sleep with anyone and doesn't know what that's like, so for that we assume that it's meritorious, that he'll be bound by Jewish law and he'll marry properly within kiddushin and chuppah, and that's a good thing. It's actually good for everyone. And as long as he's a child and hasn't tasted sin yet, he will certainly agree. So therefore, we do apply zachin la'adam shelo befanav to conversion, and that's Rav Huna's thinking. Fantastic. Okay, now lema mesayea le hagiyoret ve'ashevuya ve'ashifcha sheniftu v'shenitgayiru v'shenishtacheru pechutot mibenot shalosh shanim v'yom echad. So let's bring a support for Rav Huna from our Mishnah. Because after all, it says, we're going to focus here on Giyoret, that if she is less than 3 years old, she can be converted. And we consider her a Betulah, that's the side point. But the fact that she is converted, so that's very significant. My love, that belinu al dat betin. So how did she convert? Aren't we talking about that the betin said, you know what, we think it's good for you to convert, so we will accept your conversion for you. And so that's a proof that children can convert based on the authority of betin, because we assume it's a merit for them. And we answer, Lo hacha b'mayaskinan begel shenitgayeru banav ubenotav imo tinicha lehu b'may da'avid abuhon. So not necessarily. We could be talking about a case where the father and his children all converted together, and everyone is happy with what their father does. In other words, the father, his children are his property, are under his authority. So whatever a father does for the children, that the children go along with. The father is the legal guardian. He's authorized to make decisions on behalf of the child, whether it's good for them or not good for them. He's going to make for their financial decisions, and so it's binding in that way. So therefore, there's no proof there. So yes, for sure, a father can convert his whole family with his kids, but it's no proof from here that a betin can convert someone without the father. So there's no question against Rav Huna, but also no proof. Okay, good. Now, Amar Rav Yosef, Higdilu yecholin limchot. When a child converts, and this sounds like he's talking about no matter what, either with betin or with the father. When the child grows up, he can protest and say, listen, you converted me when I was a kid, but now that I'm 12 and a half, or for a girl, or 13 for a boy, he grows up adult and says, you know what, I really don't want to. And then he goes back to being not Jewish, and retroactively he was never Jewish at all. Yes, because he has to agree to it. Good. That's Rav Yosef's rule. Abaye challenges it. Hagiyoret v'ashibuya b'shifcha sheniftu v'shenitgayiru v'shenishtacheru pechutot mibenot shalosh shanim v'yom echad ketubatan matayim. From our very Mishnah that says that someone who converted, a girl who converted when she was under 3 years old, and then she gets married at whatever point she gets married, she gets 200 zuz as a betulah. Here's the question: and if you think that she can protest and turn away her Judaism, would we still give her a ketuvah of 200 zuz, and she's going to go and spend it as a non-Jew? We only gave it to her because Jewish wives get a ketuvah, so it was given to her under Jewish law, meant for Jews. And now she took the money and ran. And now she's a non-Jew and accepted that money. So that couldn't be possible. And therefore, it looks like that one cannot protest and change their mind, right? Let's get the timeline. It means that someone was born not Jewish. They converted she converted when she was 2 years old. She married when she was 5 years old, and then she divorced when she's 10 years old. She's going to get that money when she's 12 and a half. She's going to say, no, I don't want to be Jewish anymore, but she keeps the 200 zuz. But since she wasn't Jewish the whole time, because now she protested, she shouldn't be able to keep that money. Yet the Mishnah said, we do give her the money. So therefore, that seems like it means that she cannot protest. Okay, we answer, Lechi Gadla, you're right. You know what we do? We put the money in escrow until she becomes an adult. And if she does not protest, then we'll release the money to her. But we're not going to give it to her just in case she will protest. Well, now we ask, wait, maybe when she's an adult, at some point, whenever she's an adult, she may protest. Because right now we're thinking that she doesn't have to protest right away. She can wait till, I don't know, she's 30, 40, 50 years old. She says, you know what? I protest. You only did it when I was young, and now I'm going to... So if you release the money when she's 13 years old, but then she protests when she's 20 years old, she's still going to have that money, and she wasn't Jewish. So the answer is, Kevan shehigdila sha'achat velo mihata shuv ena yechola limchot. No, she only gets a short window of time. Once she becomes an adult, at 12 or so years old, then we give her, I don't know how much time. Sha'achat doesn't mean literally 1 hour. I don't know, it's a few days or something. And we'll ask her, and she doesn't protest, then she cannot protest any longer. Okay, this is very interesting halacha. We should talk about, what exactly is this window of time, and how is it a formal question that we ask? Do we have to inform her of the punishments and rewards like we would for a convert? Now that she's an adult, we have to kind of review and do some of that process in front of a Beit Din so she agrees to it? Or is it that we look at her actions? If she is acting like a non-Jew, she's not keeping Shabbat, but at that time, or then that shows that she wants to be. Now, if she's keeping Shabbat and doing other things that are Jewish actions, then that shows through her actions that she agrees to it. What if she didn't know that she was a convert until she's older? Maybe she was adopted. The parents never told her until she was 20 years old. So, by the way, you're adopted. You were born not Jewish. What? I never got a chance to protest. So maybe she can still protest as soon as she finds out. Okay, so all these halachot are sometimes actually happen, and so this is very, very interesting. All right, so now we solve that problem. Mativ Rava. Elu ne'arot sheyesh lahen kenas. But now we're going to have another challenge. The first challenge was said by Abaye. Rava is going to say a very similar challenge against Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef again said that when a child becomes an adult, they can protest their conversion. So Rava challenges it from another Mishnah. Elu na'arot sheyesh lahem kenas. The following are eligible to receive a fine if they are raped. Generally, a rapist has to, someone rapes a na'ara, he has to marry her. Which sounds strange, but the idea is that he has to now take care of her and pay for all her needs for her whole life, and he cannot divorce her. So that's actually, a lot of money that he's going to have to pay and take care of her whole life. But if she doesn't want to, if the father of the bride doesn't want, of the woman girl that was raped doesn't want to, then he has to pay a fine. He has to pay for the amount of betulim, because now she's no longer a betulah, and she won't be able to get that amount when she does get married. So that's the fine. Now, these people also get a fine, even though you might think not. Habal mamzeret v'la netina v'la kutit. So someone rapes a mamzeret. Now mamzeret, the rapist cannot marry her, assuming the rapist is a regular Jew. And so he could say, you might think he could say, well, I would marry her, but I'm not allowed to mamzer, so I shouldn't have to pay the fine. No, that's not true. You're the one that raped her, so you still get the fine, even though you could not marry her, even if you wanted to. Same as Netina and Kutit, who are converts, that is something problematic about their conversion, not fully converted, and also they are not allowed to marry a regular Jew. Nevertheless, they would get a fine from the ones, the rapist. And also, the three categories of women that we already had in our Mishnah, that if someone converted under 3 years old, or she was taken captive, a Jewish woman taken captive under 3 years old, or someone who was freed under 3 years old. So therefore, even if there was some bi'ah when they were that young, it doesn't matter. Their betulim grow back, and they're still called betulot, and therefore the rapist who raped them when they were already older still has to pay the fine, because we assume that they were betulot, and now he broke their betulim, so he owes the fine. Good, that's the Mishnah. And if you say that they can always, focusing specifically now on the convert, if the convert can protest once she becomes an adult and say, you know what, I don't want to be Jewish at all, so does she deserve to get the fine as a Betulah? Now she's not Jewish, so she's not going to marry a Jew. She's not going to get a Ketubah. It's not going to make a difference if she gets 200 or 100 or anything. So the rapist might say, oh, she might end up not being Jewish. Why should I pay her a fine if there's a chance that she's going to protest her Judaism? And so therefore, it must be that this is Rav Yosef is wrong, that a child, if she's converted by her father, by a betin, then it sticks, right? Just like everyone, someone who's born Jewish, we don't have the option to opt out when we become bar mitzvah. So too, it sticks, and that's the only way that we can understand that she would deserve the fine. So we answer, same as before. You know what? We keep the fine in escrow until she becomes an adult, and we see she doesn't change her mind. Then we'll give her the money. Wait a second. But maybe she'll wait till she's older and then protest later. So at what point are you going to give her the money? The answer is no. Once there's a short period of time after she becomes an adult, and we check it out, and she doesn't protest, then that's it. The window of opportunity closes, and she cannot protest any longer. Then she's fully Jewish her whole life, and then at that point we can give her the fine and give her the money. Okay, last point about this Mishnah. How come we have both of these questions by Abaye and Rava? They're so similar. How come each one didn't ask the question of the other? Abaye lo amar ke Rava, hatam kenasa. Abaye did not ask the question of Rava, the second question, because that is a fine. There you can argue that we want the rapist to pay because he did something terrible, and so he should pay as a punishment, even if the woman in the end will protest and become not Jewish, and she really doesn't deserve receiving it. Nevertheless, we want him to pay, so that will prevent people from doing the crime in the future. So therefore, he didn't ask that question. And Rava lo amar Abaye, ketubah hainu tama shelo tekala benav lohotzi'ah. Rava didn't ask Abaye's question because he would say, listen, the rabbis wanted to have a ketubah. The reason is so that husbands will not treat their wives lightly and divorce them for any old reason, and if they could, because there's no financial requirement. So we require a ketubah so that if he wants to divorce you, you can always get divorced, but you're going to have to pay this amount, and then they'll treat their wives more seriously. Now that is a value in and of itself. Even if the woman ends up protesting and becomes not Jewish, nevertheless, during the time that they're married, he will know that he has to pay the ketubah, and he'll treat her nicely. And so therefore, Rava did not ask Abaye's question, because he might say, even if she can protest and become not Jewish, still it's worthwhile for a man to have to pay a ketubah document. All right, fantastic. Now we get to the next Mishnah. Hagadol sheba ala ketana, vekatan sheba ala gedola, umukat etz ketubatan matayim dibre Rabbi Meir. All right, so now we're defining what an act of bi'ah is. What is legally considered an act of bi'ah? We're not talking about morally if these are right or wrong things to do. We just want the definition. And so an adult who has bi'ah with a ketana. Ketana means under 3 years old. We consider that not an act of bi'ah, not developed enough. Her betulim will come back. And so therefore, whatever it is, it's not bi'ah. For example, if it was arayot or something like that, we would not consider the gadol liable because it's not an act of bi'ah. V'katan sheba ala gedola, or a male, if the male is a child, for this we define it as under 9 years old. The male is not yet developed that he can have an act of bi'ah if he's less than 9 years old. So if he does some, whatever you call it, some kind of intercourse with an adult woman, that's not defined as bi'ah. Mukat etz, or if a woman lost her hymen was broken by a tree, by a stick, not by bi'ah with a person. All these people are considered betulot, and they get 200 zuz according to the Rabbi Meir. So that's the point. So the under 3 years old with the girl that we already saw in the previous, and so this is a chidush here that the boy who's with a gedolah. It would seem that the Rabbi Meir would say this even if she did see blood from that interaction. Nevertheless, it seems to be the same as mukat etz, where she doesn't have a betulim anymore, technically, but it was not from a man. It was not through bi'ah. And so too with a child, we don't consider that bi'ah. Okay, that's the words of Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omerim mukat etz ketubata maneh. He disagrees. Mukat etz, even though it was not through bi'ah, but physically she has no more betulim, and so therefore she only gets 100, and it doesn't really matter why. It's more. I guess Rabbi Meir would say it's more psychological, as long as the groom knows that she never did bi'ah, and she doesn't have a betulim. Okay, but it was never through bi'ah, so he's okay with it. Whereas Chachamim are focusing, we focus more on the technicality that the groom would expect and demand that there actually be betulim, and if there's no betulim, even if it was not through bi'ah, he only wants to pay 100. Okay. What you see is there's something missing. What do Chachamim say about the other two cases? From a Peshat point of view, it looks like they only disagree on Mukat Etz is Maneh, but the other two cases, maybe Chachamim would agree, is Matayim. But the Gemara will discuss this machloket here further. Next case, Betulah almana gerusha v'chalusa mina nisuin ketuvatan maneh. If you have someone who's a betulah, she was a betulah, and then she gets married, meaning she has a wedding ceremony, but the husband dies soon after, right? In the middle of the dancing, the husband dies. And so now she's an almana, even though she is a betulah. But it's after nisuin. We saw earlier that if it's after kiddushin, she remains a betulah. But once she does nisuin, we assume that she's like a be'ula, and she only gets 100. Also, gerusha, even if it's soon after the wedding, right? They do the wedding ceremony. I don't know, he said something mean to her, whatever, and he divorces her. Even if there's no evidence that they had bi'ah together, nevertheless, because they did the wedding ceremony, she's considered a be'ula. Chalusa, the same thing. Chalusa for sure, because she's already an almana, and furthermore chalusa. So all these only get 100. Ve'en la ta'anat betulim, and the groom, when she gets remarried to a second guy, the groom cannot come and claim, "Hey, I thought you were a betulah. I didn't see any blood. I'm not paying you." No, he has to know, since she was married already. He has to assume that there's no betulim, and so he makes no claim. הגיורת והשבויה והשפחה שנפטו ושנתגיירו ושנשתחררו יתרות על בנות 3 שנים ביום אחד. This is the opposite of the Mishnah that we started with today. If someone was a convert or converted when she was more than 3, or was taken captive when she was over 3, or if she was freed from being Shifcha Kanaanit when she's more than 3, then we suspect that she did have bi'ah, and she was more than 3 years old, and therefore she doesn't have betulim. So ketuvatan maneh, like a second marriage, she only gets 100. Ve'en la ta'anat betulin, and the husband cannot come and complain that she has no betulim, because that's what we assume in the first place. All right, so the Mishnah gives the basic outline. And now, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Katan haba ala gedola asa'a mukat es. So Rav and Shmuel are going to have a machloket where they further define that first case that we had. Rabbi Meir said all three cases matayim, young boy, young girl, or mukat es is all matayim, and Chachamim disagreed only on the mukat es. So Rav says that if it's a katana bala gedola, that's the same as mukat etz, and also that would be 200. So who was he talking about? For Rabbi Meir actually already said that they're all 200. Sounds like he's talking about 4 chachamim, and we'll ask a question in a second. Wait a second, chachamim didn't say anything about katana bala gedola, so it sounds like he agrees with Tanakama. Okay, so that's Rav. The point is that the katan, as under 9 years old, his member is not considered a member. It's like the same as a piece of wood. Ki amrita kamed Shmuel amar en mukat ayas bebasar. When Rav Yehuda said what Rav said to Shmuel, Rav Yehuda was a student of both Rav and Shmuel. So he repeated what Rav said to Shmuel, and Shmuel said, I disagree. And he said, you can't be a mukat etz with basar. If it's from flesh, even if it's a katan, and he's no less than 9 years old, still that's considered flesh, and it's not considered a mukat etz, and therefore the law would not be the same as mukat etz. Okay, that's one version of the machloket. It's also repeated in another version. Some repeat it in and by itself, without Rav Yehuda quoting them, as follows: Katana bala gedola. The title: if a child under 9 years old has bi'ah with a woman who's an adult, Rav Amar asam mukat es. Rav said that is considered the same as mukat es. It would be the same law. And Shmuel says, "En mukat es b'basar." Shmuel says, "No, it's not the same law." I guess again, it's more psychological. Does the groom that she eventually marries? It could be that if she says, "Listen, I had an accident one time, and it's through mukat es," it'll be okay. I don't care about that. But if she says it was with a person, even if it's a child, and even though it's not technically a matter of bi'ah, still he might say, "Oh, that's not what I don't agree to that." Okay. Anyway, so there's two versions. There's no difference between the versions, although it is interesting that the Gemara does record both of them, because I would assume that the first one is the original. Because the first one, you have Rav Yehuda, he goes to here, it tells the whole story, then he goes to Shmuel, and he receives Shmuel. And then it was summarized, because who cares about the story of how he got it and when he said what? We just want to know the bottom line. Rav says this, Shmuel says this. But this is a good example. Probably in general, we usually hear of traditions more in the second codified way, and it kind of looks like, they're sitting around and Rav and Shmuel are maybe speaking to each other, and Rav says this and Shmuel tells him that. But you see from here that Rav and Shmuel are in fact not together, and it's the student Rav Yehuda that's gathering both opinions, and then at some point later you lose the student and the story, and you get just the bottom line. So this is actually instructive, even though the content is the same. Now, challenge. Mativ Rav o Sha'ya Gadol Sheba ala Ketana. He's going to ask a question about Rav. All right, Rav, who says that the child, the boy under 9 is the same as mukat etz. So here, from the Mishnah, this Mishnah is coming up later, soon, the next couple of dapim. Gadol sheba ala ketana, vekatan sheba ala gedola, mukat etz. Sorry, this is a question from our Mishnah, the Mishnah that we just read, that said, it's a adult with a young adult man with a girl, or a boy with an adult woman. Umukat es ketubatan matayim dibre Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says all three are the same. Hachamim omri mukat es ketubatan maneh. And so, assuming that Rav was explaining Chachamim, but Chachamim only disagree, and they say mukat etz is maneh. So presumably that means that they would agree that katana bala gedola would be 200, and it's not the same. So Rav, how come you said that they're the same? And Rava says, here I'll answer the question. Amar Rava, hachi amar haka amar gadol haba על הקטנה ולא כלום. דפחות מכאן כנותן אצבע בעין דמה. If it's an adult male with a young girl less than 3, then that's not considered an act at all. Again, this doesn't mean it's good or we're not. There's other considerations. But the point is, for the betulim, it's not considered that it breaks the bit. She's still considered betulah because it's like someone who puts a finger in his eye. It'll irritate the eye. It'll make it tear, but it will not do permanent damage to the eye. V'katan haba ala gedola asa'a mukat etz. Whereas if it's a boy under 9 with an adult woman, that's the same as mukat etz, and mukat etz gufa pelukta Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan. And that itself, mukat etz is a machloket. Rabbi Meir says both of them are 200, and Rabbanan say no 100. And so by reformulating the Mishnah, I don't think he means to change the words. He just means that this is what the Mishnah means to say. And so, in fact, the machloket is about mukat etz and also about a katan. So that will answer the challenge to Rav. Okay, very good. Now, Amar Rami bar Hama. Machloket keshehikir ba. He says that the machloket between Chachamim, Rabbi Meir and Chachamim, applies only when the husband, the groom, was aware before the kiddushin, before he signed the ketubah, he knew that she was a mukat etz. We'll use that example. Rabbi Meir says, since he knew, and so it's the same. Bogeret means an adult woman, a woman who's more than 12 and a half, but she's still a betulah. So bogeret is the same as betulah. So even though technically she does not have betulim because she's mukat etz, but the husband knew about it and accepted it, so now she's like a betulah and therefore gets 200. Rabbanan medamu la be'ulah. Rabbanan say, no, she's like a be'ulah. Technically, physically, she doesn't have a betulim, even though it was not through bi'ah. Nevertheless, she's called be'ulah. Okay. That's all, or that machloket only applies when he was aware beforehand. But if she never told him, oh, listen, one time I had an accident, it was mukat etz, and he didn't know, he only found out after the wedding, then she gets nothing. Because then he could say, this is mekach ta'ut. I married you thinking that you actually have betulim, for whatever reason, and you never told me about that. I never agreed to it. So then everyone would agree that she gets nothing at all. That's Rami bar Chama's stance. Okay, now we ask, Rabbi Meir, amai medame la lebogeret? How come Rabbi Meir says she's like a betulah, even though she's mukat etz? Nedam meyah lebe'ulah. Why don't you say she's like be'ulah? Because after all, she has no betulim. So we answer, be'ulah it abed ba'maaseh b'dei adam. In general, be'ulah means someone who lost her betulim because of an action of a person. Here, she never had bi'ah, she was never with a person. It's because of a piece of wood. And so therefore, that doesn't count, and she's still considered a betulah. Rabbanan, adim damu la lib'ola nidam meyah lebogeret. Rabbanan, how come you compare a mukat etz with as a be'ula? Why don't you say she's like a betulah because she was never with a man? And he'll say, Bogeret la itabed b'maaseh kelal. No, Bogeret, someone who's a betulah means nothing happened to her at all. Not with bi'ah, not with an accident, zero. Ha itabed b'maaseh. This person, woman who's mukat etz, still something happened to her. So he has a stricter definition. Okay, so now we understand their machloket. And now let's analyze Rami bar Chama more. He said, Aval lo hikir ba, the divrei kol lo kelum. If the groom did not know that she had lost her betulim, even though it's through mukates. If he didn't know about it beforehand, she gets nothing. And he finds out after, she gets nothing. Is that true? Here is a challenge. Mativ Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman is going to challenge Rami bar Chama from a Mishnah that we're going to see in a couple of dapim from now. That reads, Hi omeret mukat es ani, v'hu omer lo ki ela dirusat ish at. We have a case where the night after the wedding, he finds no blood, and they come to court. And he says, I found no blood. So you see, he didn't know before. And then she says, you're right, there was no blood, but it's because mukat etz, right? I didn't cheat under you. I didn't be out with anybody ever, mukat etz. So therefore, I should still get paid. And he says, no, I don't believe you. I think that you were with a man, and you were with the man even after Kiddushin, and therefore, I am not paying you. Okay, what's the verdict? Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, ne'emenet, she is believed. Okay, so now if you say that she is believed, that she is mukat etz, that means she gets some money. She gets money if she's mukat etz, right? If mukat etz didn't get any money, and here's a case where lo hikirba, he didn't know, because that's why they're coming to court. That's why he's complaining. And nevertheless, she does get some money, whatever it is. And so this is a good challenge to Rami Bar Chama. So therefore, Rava says, I don't agree with Rami Bar Chama that mukat etz gets nothing. That's impossible to say that. The Mishnah proves that she gets something. Ela marava ben hikirba ben lo hikirba leRabbi Meir matayim leRabbanan hikirba maneh lo hikirba velo kelum. Rather, something similar to Rami Bar Chama, but he's elevating everything. According to Rabbi Meir, whether the groom knew that she's mukat etz or didn't know beforehand, it doesn't matter. She gets 200. In other words, mukat etz is a valid excuse. She still has the status of a betulah because she was never with a man. And so this was an accident. It's meaningless. Always 200. Rabbanan, however, say that if he knew about it, she gets 100. If he didn't know, then nothing. So according to this, according to Rava, that Mishnah, the Mishnah on 13a that we just quoted, has to be the opinion of Rabbi Meir that says she would at least, opinion of Rabbi Meir, that lo hikirba gets 200. Okay, so that's now. So according to Rava, even if he didn't know about it, according to Rabbi Meir, she still gets 200 if she is a mukat etz. That's Rava's position. But now we're going to note v'hadar be Rava. Rava changed his mind regarding this. Okay, from here till the end of the daf is going to be one long proof that Rava changed his mind. So let me tell you what he changed his mind to. He didn't change his mind to agree with Rami Bar Chama that she gets nothing. Rather, he changed his mind to say that she at least gets 100. If a woman is mukat etz and he didn't know about it before, then she doesn't get 200, but gets 100 according to Chachamim. And therefore, in that retraction, the Mishnah that we just mentioned can be even according to Chachamim. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to prove, that Rava changed his mind. So let's see the proof. Okay, so again, the case is, he didn't know that she was mukat etz beforehand. He found out afterwards. And so far, Rava said that according to Chachamim, she gets nothing. Let's see. The Tanya. And he changed his mind. Okay. Detanya, kesad hosa'at shem ra. We have a Braita that says, what does it mean to slander someone? Bad bet lebetin v'amar peloni lo masati lebitecha betulim. A groom comes to court and says to his father-in-law, listen, we consummated our marriage and I did not find that your daughter has betulim, so therefore I have a claim against you. If there are witnesses that she, the bride, cheated on him after Kiddushin, that means tachtav, after Kiddushin, then he only has to pay 100. Now we interrupt for a second. Hold on, if there are witnesses that she cheated on him, then she gets sikilah for adultery, because it's considered adultery after Kiddushin, even before the Nisu'in. No, hachi kamar. Okay, rephrase the Braita. Im yesh edim shezinta tachtav biskila, zinta meikara yesh la ketubah maneh. Rather, if there are witnesses say she cheated on him after the Kiddushin, then the punishment would be stoning. But if witnesses say she had bi'ah with someone earlier before the Kiddushin, then she has to pay 100. So what do you see here? This is a case where he didn't know, and it's before the marriage, so she didn't do anything wrong. It's not prohibited as adultery, and yet they get 100. So this would be equivalent to mukat etz, and he didn't know. That would be 100. Okay, so this is the Braita. Already you see the Braita is different from what Rava said. Now, But this is not full proof yet that he changed his mind. V'amar Rav Chiya bar Avin amar Rav Sheshat zot omeret kenasa becheskat Betulah v'nimset be'olah yesh la ketubah maneh. Rav Sheshat says we can derive from that baraita that in general, if someone marries thinking that his bride is a Betulah, and it turns out she is a Be'ulah, she still gets 100. You don't say mekach ta'ut and I thought you're Betulah, I don't want to marry you at all, you get 0. No, because in general a Be'ulah would still get 100, and so she still gets 100. That's what Rav Sheshat derives from the Baraita, which is a pretty good derivation. So far so good. Now, Mativ Rav Nachman challenges Rav Sheshat from another Mishnah that we're going to see on the next daf. And this Mishnah, similar to the Mishnah on 2 dapim, says, they get married. That means he didn't know beforehand. And now he says, hey, there's no betulim. And he brings her to court. He omeret mishe erastani ne'enasti v'nistafechefa sadehu. She says, sorry, but it was after the kiddushin, that's when I was raped. That's why I have no betulim, and it's too bad for you. Your field has been flooded. It's a phrase to mean that sometimes you have bad luck, and you were expecting to have something, but your crop got ruined, and therefore I didn't trick you. I was telling you the truth. When we did kiddushin and we signed the ketubah, I was in fact a betulah, and it was against my will because of ones that this happened. I guess he's not a kohen. And therefore, you still have to pay me 200 zuz. That's her claim. And he says, no, I think that you were raped. I agree that you were raped. I don't think you did it on purpose. But I think it was before the kiddushin. And you didn't tell me that you had lost your betulim at the time of kiddushin, when we signed the ketuvah. And therefore, the transaction is a mistaken transaction. Now, when you say mekach ta'ut, that means I'm returning the item for refund, right? Velet la kelal, and therefore she gets 0. Okay, so what we see from this Mishnah is that in a case where he didn't know beforehand, if he would follow his claim, and he didn't know beforehand, then and turns out she's not a betulah, then she gets 0. So this is a challenge to Rav Sheshat. It's also a challenge to the Braita that he's based on. And Rav Sheshat says if he didn't know, you get 100. So what's going on? Can we find the answer to this? So this is Rav Nachman's question. Now, we're going to challenge Rav Nachman's question and give an answer to it also from the following story. V'amar lehu Rav Chiya bar Avin. Rav Chiya bar Avin is the one that quoted Rav Sheshat in the first place, but he's telling us the rest of the story too, and says, if Shad, Rav Chiya bar Avin quoted Rav Sheshat, means he supports Rav Sheshat. And when Rav Nachman comes and challenges it, Rav Chiya bar Avin defends Rav Sheshat as follows. It says, if Shad Rav Amram, v'chol gedolei hador, yatveh ki amar Rav Sheshat lahashemata. Says, listen, Rav Amram and all the great sages were there when Rav Sheshat said his halacha. V'kashya lehu. And in fact, they asked your question, Rav Nachman, v'shaneh, and they answered it. They brought up the same question. Well, you're not the only one that knows the Mishnah. And they answered, "Mai mikach ta'ut, nami mimatayim. Aval maneh itla." They said, "Mekach ta'ut doesn't necessarily mean she gets nothing. It means this is a mekach ta'ut. I paid 200 for something that's worth 100. That's what the groom's claim is. But really, for sure, he would have to pay 100. And now you come and say, "Oh, I have a question that mekach ta'ut means 0." No, we already dealt with your question, and the great rabbis already answered it, and therefore you have no claim. Rav Sheshat is correct. Okay, good. So now all that is what happened, and now Rav Nachman is left there. His question has been rejected. But then comes Rava. This is why Rava is relevant. We're going to see here how he changed his mind. Rava is reflecting on this earlier conversation, and he said, Rav Nachman's question was really a good question, because mekach ta'ut legamre mashma. When you say this is a mistaken transaction, that usually means it's completely mistaken, and I want to pay 0. And so really do have a good question. Rav Sheshat, based on the Braita, said that if he didn't know, you have to pay 100, and this Mishnah says you pay 0. So, in fact, Rav Nachman does have a good question, and we reject Rav Sheshat. All right, well, you can reject Rav Sheshet, but still doesn't help us because we have the Braita. Remember the Braita about the definition of slander? So you can reject Rav Sheshet from a Mishnah, but what are you going to do with the Braita? Oh, here's what we'll do. Teres v'amachi, we'll reread the Braita. Im yesh aidim shezinta tachtav biskila. If the witnesses come and say that she cheated on him after the kiddushin, then yeah, that's adultery. She gets sekila. Zinta meikara velo kelum. If she had bi'ah before the kiddushin altogether, then 0. Pays 0. So that's in accordance with the Mishnah above, even though we rejected Rav Sheshet. Nimset mukat etz yesh la Ketubot maneh. But if it's a case of mukat etz, then she would get 100. In this rereading of that Baraita, we're adding yet another case. Originally, the Baraita said that if the witnesses said that she was mizaneh before kiddushin, then she gets nothing. But now rereading it to say no. If she had bi'ah before kiddushin, she gets nothing. So what case does she get 100? Oh, that's mukat etz. In other words, mukat etz is better than if she had bi'ah beforehand. If she didn't tell them that she had bi'ah beforehand, that's total mekach ta'ut. You were with another guy before and you never told me and you're not a betulah, forget it. I don't want to pay you anything. But if it's mukat etz, then she's less liable. She was not with another man. So it's true she doesn't have betulim and she hid it from him. She should have told her, so I'm not going to pay 200 for not having betulim. But in that case, it's she didn't do anything wrong, nothing bad, so it wouldn't be any worse than almana, and she should in fact get 100. So according to Rava's rereading of the Baraita, a mukat etz, when he didn't know beforehand, does get 100. Now, earlier, the original statement of Rava said that in the opinion of Rabbanan, against the Meir, if he didn't know that she was mukat etz, she gets nothing. But now it's 100. Therefore, Rava must have changed his mind, and from nothing to 100. It's still not the same as Rami Bar Chama, who said that she gets 200, but here at least she does get 100 if she was mukat etz and he didn't know beforehand. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.